I'm talking today about a project which hasn't yet started. Um, we're, we hope it will. Um, in 2016, funds were granted by the president of the Max Planck Society for an independent research group to research the provenance of brain research specimens, which it holds, which derive in part from Holocaust victims. Or particularly euthanasia victims primarily, although there was also research in the Warsaw Ghetto. This research group, here are the members of it: Herwig Czech, Patricia Haber of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Gerrit Hohendorf from the Technical University Munich, Volker Roelke, and myself. Volker and Gerrit are also psychiatrists. So we hope this will be an interdisciplinary group. The project is meant to start June 2017 and to run to 2021. We'll have to gain, first thing I would like to say, I can speak freely. When I am part of the project and when all the papers are signed, I will have to get the permission of a lawyer from the Max Planck Society for any publication, and you can count PowerPoints as such a publication. They certainly do. Our gain is that, or the deal is that we negotiated the right of access to all relevant Max Planck Society papers. They initially offered only to 2004, but we have achieved access to all Max Planck Society documents on this issue to the present. What this relates to, basically, you can see here. This is the burial stone for, and I'll show you what should be there. And the inscription says, it's a memorial for the responsible self-limitation in research. It's a collective memorial, and it's an anonymized memorial. What should be buried? The brain slides from 3 institutes. 84,333 slides from Julius Hallervorden, from Hugo Spatz, 111,950 slides, 250 organs, then from the German Institute of Psychiatry, again, a lesser number of slides because the Brain Research Institute gave its totality of holdings. The psychiatric institutes were selective, and the neurological institution were particularly selective. What I also know is that there were the brain slides of some Allied prisoners of war. There were some slides of executed persons who were subject from the prison in Munich, of Stadelheim. Then there is a list of brain tissues from the Warsaw and from other Polish ghettos. And also there are brains from, we also know that brains were researched on from Dachau concentration camp, not very many, but still, and we do not know quite where these have ended up. The issue goes back to, you can say, to the mid-1980s, to Götz Ali. And Götz Ali challenged the Max Planck Society regarding its holdings of brain tissues, saying these are from euthanasia victims. He demanded, in this book, the transfer of documents to a historical archive. Rightly so. The society at that time was outraged, in denial, and attacked him massively. The 1990 burial, they were commemorated as a Nazi victim group, correct, but the role of scientists under National Socialism was not considered. Also, the fact that scientists were basically saying, we have autonomy, so they dissociated themselves from the past. There were clergy present, Protestant, Catholic, and a rabbi. We do not know in this project, but it's something that we will find out whether any of the victims were Jewish. We expect there will be, but we do not know, and particularly if these Warsaw Ghetto slides were also buried. The actual burial was, you could say, private. There were select public dignitaries, but there was no role for relatives. There were no role for victim representative groups, and other expert groups like lawyers or historians or a wider public were just not invited. This is a document from the then director of the archives of the Max Planck Society, and Dr. Curt Hennig. He advised the society against having a commission to research the provenance of the slides. He says that this will take a long time and will yield also, there will be a lot of problems in the personal identification. So he advises the society against this and rapid burial, because between 85 and 1990, what happened was they switched round. The public concern about that German scientific institutes were holding specimens from Holocaust victims had really built up, particularly regarding anatomical institutes. So the society wants to, it decides, it says it's going to cleanse its collections and does this rapid so-called cleansing against the polluting, it's also a term that's used from the time, against these polluting slides. So the idea is they can draw a line with the past and move forwards. Bill Idleman, he writes in Nature, there must be public documentation. Whoops. I need to go back. No. I need to go back. Sorry. Oh, I can go back here. Yeah. Bill writes, presciently, there must be public documentation of who these people once were, how they died, and how institutions representing science, medicine, and higher education used their remains for almost half a century. Absolutely right, because these remains were used actively for research until the 70s, the 80s, and beyond. So after 1945. So that, and the one thing that we see they didn't do was to go down the path of identification. Since then, there was a major historical commission of the Max Planck Society. Here we see the president of the society, very engaged, Hubert Markl, giving an apology in 2001 to Eva Moses Kor and a group of Mengele twins. However, this commission is very much praised. I was a member of it, and one thing that I said at the time, why are we not researching fully the history of the Psychiatric Institute? And when the commission was finally wound down, I did write a letter to the president of the society saying, we need a full history of the Psychiatric Institute and of other institutes. From my point of view, your terminating of the commission is premature. What had been shown by the commission, though, that there were problematic links to murderous research. Volker Rölke showed, for example, Carl Schneider, the psychiatrist, and T4. So the denial which had been exercised by the Institute of Psychiatry was already breaking down. The apology was well received. It was it was an impressive occasion, and it was genuine. It was in June 2001, but in July 2001, here is a confidential personal letter regarding brain slides being held in the Max Planck Society archives in Berlin. The responsible official, I will not be able to show this document when this commission is running. At least I won't be able to show it in the form that I'm showing it. but it's important to note the date, and it's important to note it was the same official who was actually managing the apology to the Mengele twins as writes this letter. And the letter acknowledges at least 3 victims, euthanasia victims, but they are going to do nothing. All they do is take advice from a Professor Kreutzberg, a psychiatrist in the Munich Psychiatric Institute, and nothing is being done. Well, this is 1 month after the apology. So they go for not quite denial, but inactivity regarding a problematic collection of brain slides. So what should have been done, because with the commission was working a neuropathologist, Jürgen Pfeiffer, and he had the scheme of reconstructing the life histories of all brain research victims. He was working on that. And Volker Rölke was also doing very important work. So the fact that the commission switched its attention to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, see, it's easy for them to work on the anthropology and Mengele because there are no continuities to the present. But brain research and psychiatry, these are massive prestige areas for their research. So it was an unhappy situation. I, though, came back into this, and I came back into this from working on this project with colleagues on the victims of the victims of all Nazi medical experiments, but the brain research victims are part of this. So what did I do? I had a discussion about this with Hubert Markl, and he said, write to the current president of the society in February, which I did in February 2011. I requested access. I said, well, first of all, it was just a modest request for a listing of what was buried. Unfortunately, they couldn't disclose an actual list, simple thing, you would have thought, and they'd forgotten exactly what was buried. However, a little bit of persistence, they make available a very, very large quantity of documents. I remember I was due to go on a tour with Shelley and Shelley Rubenfeld and CMAT, and I had to ring Shelley, look, I'm stuck with this big pile of documents, they're letting me copy them, I have to use the opportunity, I'm going to come late. What these documents showed was not only rapid burial, but every time a critical study was published by Gherzali or by Benno Müller-Hill, they wrote an internal memorandum objecting to it. So they were monitoring the build-up of a critical history, and it was a highly defensive position. So we have an institution which is in denial, which is refusing to concede its full complicity in these issues of how it profited from the euthanasia on children and adults. So this is a listing, partial listing at least, from the Munich archives of the slides that were buried. It's just part of a very, very long list. But once it was recently divulged, it was recently found. So that, and there is other documentation which which they said has vanished, it's not there, but they're finding it. So that's a good thing as a result of the furor. Herr Weber, who is the psychiatrist who wrote a rather apologetic and defensive biography of Ernst Rudin, the psychiatrist who was involved in National Socialism. But by 2015, I had the impression of an institution in deep confusion. Every time I went to the Society archives to use the documentation on the brain research victims, I have a different ruling. You cannot mention the names of euthanasia victims. You have to give them to us. We will black them out. Next time, yes, you can mention the names of euthanasia victims, but you can't mention the names of research subjects, and there were also among these persons who had died from natural causes, and this is the problem that we're going to be faced with, whose brains were researched on. So they're sensitive, and why are they sensitive? It's because of this box of 100 slides of 27 patients, at least 3 cases which are euthanasia. But what had happened? Firstly, a former director of the Institute for Brain Research had noticed the present and said, how can you be holding these slides when we had decided that everything was to be buried? So that was the first problem. The second problem that emerges, some of the slides, all relating to a particular clinical condition, have gone missing. This has been a major problem. 2 historians were brought in to look at this problem, Wolfgang Eckert, Robert Jutte. It is a secret, confidential report. The report focuses on the theft of the brain slides. How do I know the contents of this report? Because it has been blown open in public very, very recently by the Süddeutsche Zeitung, who have been given a copy, at least one copy, of this totally confidential report. I haven't seen it. And the report, it was like a bombshell, because just at the time that the German Institute of Psychiatry, the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry, is celebrating its centenary, this documentation was massively released to the public. Well, the idea of a confidential report on this issue was maybe something that they thought they're going to manage it. Then there is not only, we have our project, but at the same time that we have our project agreed, it's held up. And I must say I've done nothing for months but read different copies of legal agreements, because every time we gain something, the Max Planck Society wants to insert a new clause. So it's very, very difficult. But let me, try to explain the issues. We have what was 5 minutes? Yeah. We have the issue of the contents of the report. We do not of the contents of what was buried. We don't know whether the documents and the actual burial matches up. The slides are in aluminium containers. Unlike Vienna, this is from a prisoner of war, for example, the brain slide. Unlike Vienna in the Spiegelgrund, where they cremated and melted the slides, the slides are apparently intact. We know about the identity of some of the victims because these researchers walked off with, this is a group of victims who were deliberately killed, and because Franz Zeitelberger, for his habilitation, was later rector of the university, took these off to the Spiegelgrund specimens, the children could be buried with their names. So the idea is to use, this is the Max Planck Society, we should use Vienna as the model, have the name, dates of birth, dates of death. No diagnoses is what they say. That's difficult. It's going to be difficult to discuss things without diagnosis. So this, I think, just to wrap it up, there is another commission which is running in the background. This commission is only it's got only Max Planck Society personnel, so no outsider. There is no, I can say, outside interest. There is in October 2015 a small commemoration, and the Max Planck Society still doesn't want the full names divulged. I get in trouble for saying the opposite. And then this internal commission of the Max Planck Society, what they're basically doing is to check, are we holding any other human remains in our collections? They think that they have now gone through this provenance, this whole sort of screening of their collections. They don't think they've got any more human tissue parts. So the idea is that they're going to let myself and my historical colleagues in to research really the biographies of the victims for commemorative purposes. But it's still still we are now in a state of high sensitivity, and the issue of whether the archives have been systematically covering matters up is still unresolved. And there I'll stop.